Imagine that in your country, all cafes, restaurants, and any food establishments don't belong to large corporations, private entrepreneurs, or even family businesses. Everything belongs to the state, and the government is responsible for, plans, and strictly controls all food service outside your home. Yes, in the Soviet Union it was exactly like this. It was all called the Public Catering Department, or simply obshchepit for short. This was a truly amazing system, well thought out and calculated, and I believe this system was the only one of its kind in the world. So let's talk about it today. Hello friends, my name is Julie and you're on the Soviet-born channel where we tell you the whole truth about the Soviet Union that no one else will tell you. So stay with us, it's going to be very interesting. Public catering in the USSR was thought out to the smallest detail. Entire institutes worked on this, and it was absolutely identical everywhere, regardless of region. Everything on the menu was compiled according to government standards. All recipes were approved by the USSR Ministry of Trade and published in special recipe collections with print runs of 150,000 copies. Cooks throughout the country prepared strictly according to the same technological cards, where every stage of preparation was detailed. Partial substitution of ingredients from one recipe variant to another was categorically not allowed. If a dish was called meat salad, then it had to be absolutely identical from Moscow to Vladivostok. As I said, Soviet food was calculated, it was filling, it was supposed to be nutritious. And of course, it had to be absolutely safe for health. This was overseen by an organization called the Sanitary and Epidemiological Station, which regularly inspected all cafeterias for bacteria and mandated that all cafeteria workers undergo medical examinations once every 6 months. This was necessarily a thorough medical exam, meaning a complete medical checkup. All employees wore white clothing like I am today. And this cleanliness of clothing was also very strictly monitored. Especially those people who were serving the food couldn't have manicures, couldn't be in the kitchen without head coverings. The cleanliness of any cafeterias was monitored very strictly. Since I worked in Soviet retail myself, I know all the public catering rules firsthand. Swab tests were done. Inspections were conducted. All workers in all cafeterias had to have proper education. They studied specifically for this. There were culinary schools and culinary technical colleges, and therefore the food and food quality was the same everywhere. It was filling, it was nutritious, and it was tasteless. That's for sure. You wouldn't find it tasty there. Therefore, throughout the entire history of Soviet public catering, any food poisoning incidents, whether in schools or workplace cafeterias, well, I probably never even heard of such cases, because this was not only very strictly monitored, but the cafeteria workers themselves took this very seriously, because the consequences could be not just dismissal. There was a criminal charge for this. The main places people ate out were, of course, school cafeterias and workplace canteens. School cafeterias were big halls, filled with long tables lined up together. But there were no chairs. Each class had its own table with a sign. Nearby, there were a few tables with chairs. Those were for the teachers. The younger kids usually ate after the second or third class. And their menu was usually some kind of porridge, mostly semolina. It tasted bad and was lumpy, not sweet, and usually came with a piece of bread, with a small pat of butter on top. For a drink, if you were lucky, there was compote. But most of the time, there was kissel, which is a thick, jelly-like fruit drink, kind of like a runny jam. Or else there was that terrible overboiled milk that no kid in the cafeteria actually drank, because it was boiled to death and always had a thick skin on top. Still, it was filling. And if you were really hungry, you'd still end up eating something. At least it was about as healthy as you could get. Such meals for younger grades cost 1 ruble 20 kopecks. For older grades, meals already cost parents 1 ruble 50 kopecks per week. They ate after the fourth or third lesson, and the menu was usually pearl barley or barley porridge with either a cutlet or sausage, a roll, and the same compote or kissel. Of course, since I went to a Soviet school, the cafeteria food was really bland. We barely ate anything there, but still, it was enough to tide us over until we got home to eat. Since I was from a middle-class family, and for us the meals were more of an obligation, I barely ate anything at school. But for many families, especially those who didn't have much money, in our classes, there were lots of kids like that, mostly from big families, and the cafeteria really helped them out. They actually got to eat for free. And I remember, there were even moments when the lunch lady from our cafeteria would even come over and add a little more food to such children to feed them even more. I remember there was even a moment when a girl in my class lived alone with her grandmother. I don't know why this happened to her, but she always dressed very poorly. Teachers tried to help her. And I remember when we were given this bread for breakfast with a piece of butter on it. Of course, no one ate this bread with butter. We, with our classmates, with the girls, her friends, would collect all this food, this whole plate, and give it to Ira. That's what this girl was called, so she could take it home. On holidays, they sometimes gave us dessert. It would be an orange. It was great luck if they gave a whole orange, but usually on holidays, this was for New Year, they gave half an orange, and everyone in the cafeteria looked forward to this treat. And sometimes once a week, we'd get a bun. That was the best thing in the whole school cafeteria. Buns were basically our currency among kids, because you could trade them for all sorts of treasures. Back then, girls would collect postcards and collect candy wrappers, especially those from chocolates. All of us had these little collections, and we were so proud of them. Back then, you could trade, for example, a bun for a candy wrapper you had your eye on, or a postcard from a friend's collection. The only thing we never traded was the orange, of course. That was what everyone treasured most. Some kids ate theirs right away, others took it home. I would bring mine home to share with my little sister, who was in kindergarten then. That's the kind of school cafeteria we had. Workplace cafeterias were also identical throughout the Soviet Union, regardless of whether it was a factory, plant, or any other large enterprise. All designs were standardized. These were huge, large dining halls with tables for 4 people. On the other side ran a conveyor belt, an entire line, which people entered in turn. Nearby stood aluminum trays. A worker would take an aluminum tray and walk along this line. The menu was always the same everywhere. There was a first course, a main, and a dessert. The first course was usually soup or borscht. As the joke went, it was either too watery, like soup, or too thick, like borscht. Then came the side dishes. It was usually kasha, mashed potatoes, or stewed cabbage. After that, people could go up and choose what to have with it. Usually it was either fried fish or a kotleta, a kind of meat patty. Many joked about the cutlets, because a cutlet is certainly not what you might see in your burger. This was usually something very hard, small in size. As they joked, they said, "We don't know what's in there, but we know many hands have touched it." For dessert, it was a bun served with compote. A meal like that cost between 33 and 50 kopecks, depending on what you picked. Nearby stood a cash register. A cashier sat there, where the person who had taken a tray with food would pay and go eat. Remembering the school cafeteria, remembering the workplace cafeteria, I can say only one thing: it was truly brilliant. Yes, the food was about as tasteless as it gets, and anyone who ate there will tell you the food didn't leave much of an impression. But it was accessible, it was filling, and it was safe. A person absolutely didn't worry about what their child would eat. A person didn't worry about what they themselves would eat at work. The state had already taken care of this, and it was truly very accessible. Since both school cafeterias and workplace cafeterias, any working Soviet person could afford this. Yes, of course. As I'll repeat once more, it was all the same and honestly not tasty at all. I can even say that once, long ago, I watched a Charlie Chaplin retrospective. And I remember there was a film called Modern Times. I think that's what it was called. And it showed this assembly line. When I looked at this assembly line, it somehow reminded me of public catering in the Soviet Union. Sure, there were also cafes and restaurants in the Soviet Union, but trust me, they were nothing like the places you're familiar with. I'll tell you all about them in upcoming videos. You might be surprised. It's going to be really interesting. So subscribe to our channel. Leave comments about what kind of food you had in your schools, at your workplaces. Follow the link in the description to our Patreon. Support us if you have the opportunity. And huge thanks to those who already support us. This was Julie, the Soviet-born channel.
И до новых встреч!